you're running short on cash. What payments can you skip? Maureen and I will discuss it starting right now.
This is Debt Free in 30. Here's your host, Doug Hoyes.
Maureen, welcome back. How are you doing today?
Pretty good, thanks. Yourself?
I am doing fantastic. So for those of you who have never watched the show before, Maureen Parent is the licensed insolvency trustee at Hoyes Michaelis who hangs out in our Canada office, which is of course part of the Ottawa region. So if you're in the Ottawa region, you need help, Maureen is your person. Is it Canada or Canada?
I say Canada.
Okay,
yeah.
So we'll go with that and assume that's correct. Okay, so my question for you today, and I have no notes, so I'm winging this. Hopefully you can carry the conversation and tell me all the answers to this. I want to know what bills I can skip if I'm having a cash flow problem. So every single person who contacts us has a cash flow issue. That's why they're calling us. If they had unlimited money, they'd be able to pay all their debts and everything would be fine. So what do you do when you get into a bit of a cash flow crunch? So it could be that, well, I was off sick for a week, and so my paycheck is a bit lower. Could be that I actually got laid off. Could be, who knows what the issue is. But for whatever reason, I do not have enough cash today to pay every single bill that I have to pay. So in a situation like that, the obvious solution is, okay, well, if you can skip a payment, delay a payment, then get back on track, you're all good. And at the end, we'll talk about what do I do in the really serious situation where it's a lot bigger dollars than that. But that's the question. So what I'd like to do is visualize in our heads what a budget would look like if you were to make a list of every bill you pay every month and then go through them and say, okay, can I skip that? Can I defer it? What can I do? So the first bill that comes to mind, the biggest bill we pay every month, is our rent. So, okay, can I skip my rent? What happens if I do? Because that would be the biggest possible savings. What are your thoughts on rent?
Rent is risky to miss because that's the roof over your head. So when you're looking at what you're going to skip, you want to make sure you're doing an analysis going, hey, how at risk am I going to be? So I think risking where you live is pretty risky. So I would recommend making sure you pay your rent. If there's difficulties, contact your landlord and say, hey, you know what, can I pay 2 weeks later? Can I pay a few days later? Usually when there's communication, it's a bit easier, but I would say deferring it a little bit of time might work. However, deferring such a large payment, it just makes the problem bigger later on. So it really depends on the situation that you're in. But I would say definitely try not to miss your rent.
Okay, so you raised a couple of really good points there. The first one was risk. You used the word risk, and I agree. So when you're looking at what bill can I skip, what bill can I defer, you got to ask yourself, well, what is the risk if I do that? So if I stop paying my rent forever, eventually I will get evicted and I will not have a place to live. That's the risk. So I agree with that. You made another excellent point, which was, okay, if I do defer this payment, it just means I've got way more payments to do in the future. So am I really helping myself by deferring that? So my answer to that question, I agree with everything you said, would be, okay, I get paid on the 4th this month, but my rent is due on the 1st. What do I do? Well, I guess I could go get a payday loan to pay my rent. I do not recommend that.
No.
Because you're just taking on a huge amount of interest. In that scenario, I would do what you said, which would be communicate with my landlord. I would contact my landlord and say, look, I'm really sorry, but I will not have the money on the 1st, but I will have it on the 4th. Can I pay you on the 4th? Sorry, one-time event, got sick, was off work, whatever. Can I get caught up? And in most cases, the landlord's going to say, well, your rent is due on the 1st, but okay, 3 extra days, 4 extra days, fine, pay it on the 4th, make sure you're caught up in the future. So that's how I would handle rent. Now, I would then go to the next step, which is let's make sure I mitigate the chances of getting into this same problem again in the future. So can I set aside the money for rent every paycheck?
Right.
So instead of saying, well, I get paid twice a month, so the last check of the month is what I pay my rent with, and then the first check of the month is what I pay all my other expenses with. Well, that works out great until you miss your last paycheck of the month because you were sick or whatever. So if you can be putting aside that money in advance, you're probably in a better shape. Okay, that's rent. The other roof over your head expense would be a mortgage. If you happen to own a house and you've got a mortgage payment similar to rent, except obviously you're paying a debt, you're paying the bank. So what if I can't make my mortgage payment? Do you have the same advice as with rent, or is it different?
Well, with a mortgage, there is usually an option to defer a payment. So again, you are communicating, so that's a similar thing. When you call the mortgage company, they may agree to defer a payment or two. They'll set up a predetermined amount with you, and then you'll have a period of time where there is no mortgage payment. They'll put it to the end. So the benefit is that you have a significant amount of cash to adjust what you need. However, you're going to be paying interest on that. So you'll probably be paying more. Well, you will be paying more in the long run. So you want to look at that as well. Is what I'm doing right now worth it for me to be paying more in the long run?
Yeah. And so if I'm deferring a mortgage payment, if I have a 25-year mortgage, and there's 23 years left to run on it in my bizarre example, if I take this month's payment and put it to the end, in effect, I'm paying, in my example, 23 years more worth of interest. Right. Now, that's kind of a made-up example and is probably silly, but that is the financial impact of deferring. But you're right. The flip side of it is, well, the mortgage interest I'm paying is probably my lowest interest debt, as compared to the interest I'm paying on my credit card, which is a lot higher. So I guess if I'm going to defer something, then the financial impact is probably less. So your advice is then what? Contact the mortgage company? What are you suggesting here?
Yeah, definitely. You want to contact the mortgage company, but you also want to think first. When you contact the mortgage company, you want to ask them, we're entering into this deferral arrangement. What if something comes up in the future? Can I ever make this deferral arrangement again? So the answer might be yes, depends on your situation, or the answer may be no. This is a one-time thing over the term of the mortgage and you cannot do this again. So then you want to make sure, is this really a dire enough situation for me to do that? So you want to think about that first.
Yeah, and I agree. Understand the terms of your mortgage. What does it say? So it may be that, yeah, you're allowed to defer one payment during the life of the mortgage or during the amortization period, or maybe it's purely at the discretion of the bank. During the whole COVID period, starting in 2020, a lot of banks, mortgage companies it was no problem. Yeah, you want to defer 3 months payments, we'll automatically do it. Whether that is still an option for you now is something you got to talk to your lender about. And if you've already used a bunch of deferral periods, then it's a lot more difficult to keep doing that. But again, rather than having a mortgage payment bounce, it's far better to talk to the lender up front and say, look, here's my situation. Can I defer a payment? Maybe I can double up on a future payment. Maybe I can increase my payments. Whatever it is, work out some kind of arrangement. Now, go ahead.
The other thing too, I wish I knew how to do those little hands on Zoom so I can put my little hand up.
Well, I can actually see your hand, so you can put your hand up there.
Oh no. And now, of course, I forgot what I was going to say because that's what I do. But when we were talking about the mortgage and stuff like that and missing, yes. So oftentimes we have the mortgage with the same bank that we bank with. That's quite common. So the other thing to understand too is if you haven't contacted your bank to make the deferral and you simply just miss your payment, they have the right to go into your bank account and scoop your payment. So it's possible that it won't help you and they will take out the money that you were to pay at the most inopportune time for you. So you do want to make sure you're communicating with them so you're mitigating that risk of having money taken from your account by that bank if you bank with them.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. Mortgage payments are set up to come out once a month or every 2 weeks or whatever it is on whatever day. And so you can't just call the bank and say, hey, will you stop it? They have to agree. Otherwise, the computer will keep doing this. Let me give you an analogy to illustrate that point. You'll get this one because I know you're a big baseball player. So I'm in the batter's box and I request time from the umpire. If the umpire doesn't grant me time, then the pitch is still coming in. You've actually got to get him. You can't just be stepping out of the batter's box and assuming everything's fine. And I think it's exactly the same with the bank. You got to communicate with them, ask them to grant you the deferral. Otherwise, yes, the money will just be coming right out of your bank account. So both mortgage and rent have to do with the roof over your head. There are a bunch of other things that are also roof over your head, like utilities. So, okay, maybe I don't need to defer an entire rent payment or a mortgage payment, which could be $1,000 or $2,000 or whatever it is. Maybe I just need a little bit of a break with my hydro bill. So what's the thought process there if I'm going to be a little tight on my hydro bill this month?
I find oftentimes what I see is that if people are going to skip a utility bill, they're not talking to the utility company first. They're just skipping it. They're like, oh, it's okay. It's small. I'll figure it out later. And then, so when you miss a payment, there's interest added to the amount that you're owing. If you did have a discount with the utility, once you miss a payment, that discount will be gone. I am so sorry. That's my son. They have the emergency breakthrough and I didn't turn to the
Probably
phone.
a creditor calling.
Yeah, I know. Well, the last time he wasn't able to get to me, he had actually broken his ankle. So that's why I have them on emergency breakthrough so I can be available. But,
there you go. Well, if you need to deal with his broken ankle, we can deal with
he'll double call. That's the emergency.
Okay. There we go.
You double call and I know it's an emergency.
So
anyway.
So with utilities then, continue. If
you have the discount on the bill, you can lose that and then they never reinstate it again. So and utilities don't tend to rush to cut you off, which is why I think some people feel like, okay, yeah, no, I'll just miss this utility and I'll catch it up later. Oftentimes, I think that happens because there is a definite fluctuation in utility bills. Like electricity is low for a period of time and then the heat wave comes and you're putting on air conditioning and all of a sudden there's a lot of money that we aren't regularly budgeting for. So I think with utilities, still the same thing. You want to contact them. You want to talk with them. I know that can be difficult, but you want to enter into a payment arrangement. And once you do so, you want to make sure you're honoring that payment arrangement.
Now, you mentioned the word budget here, and as you know, I'm not a fan of budgeting. I think it's a waste of time. However, I do believe that you should be proactive. So if you know that, okay, my hydro bill fluctuates throughout the year, my air conditioning's higher in the winter, if I have in the summer, if I've got electric heat, it's higher in the winter, whatever, then one strategy is to say, okay, let's average it out for the course of the entire year. And then based on that, I'm going to send the hydro company an equal amount on every paycheck. And of course, hydro companies and gas companies will set you up on equal billing, which accomplishes the same thing. So if you're worried that, in the summer, I'm going to get hit with this big bill for my air conditioning and I'm not going to be able to pay it, well, you can smooth it out over the course of the year. And that way you never get in the position where you have to ask for a deferral because you've done it in advance. But again, as with everything else, if you get on the phone with them first and let them know, hey, I got a problem this month, then you're in a lot better shape than having them take the payment out. Because when someone takes a payment, and if the money isn't there, you get hit with a service charge from the utility company, but you're also getting hit with an NSF fee at your bank. So now you missed your $100 hydro bill. The hydro company charges you $20 or $30, and the bank charges you $40. And now you're $100 in the hole by the time the service charges and interest and everything else kicks in. So again, far better to be proactive on that.
And if you're paid bi-weekly and you're setting up your budget, as you said, to kind of make those payments, if you're structuring it so that that average is paid bi-weekly, you'll actually get a little bit ahead because there's 2 months where you have those 3 pays, and that gives you a little bit of a reprieve in the future for other times if there's a difficulty, because now you have a little bit ahead. So then you're setting yourself up to kind of give a reprieve when needed.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of that. To me, that strategy is far better than budgeting. It's like, okay, my hydro bill is $100 a month, $1,200 a year. I get paid bi-weekly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to send $50 to hydro every 2 weeks. And then you're right. When I hit my 3-pay month, which happens twice a year, I send them an extra $50 because I'm doing it every 2 weeks. So at some point, well, at the end of a year, I will be one payment ahead with them. And so if I do need to defer a payment, well, it doesn't matter. I'm already a payment ahead. It's fantastic. You also, go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to point out too that for like the Ontario Energy Board has a couple of programs for low income families too, right? So they have the LEAP program, which is the low income energy assistance program. So if someone is considered low income, and on the Ontario Energy Board website, they do have a grid to say how many people you have in your family and what's considered to them low income. They will help give a lump sum towards your utility bill, obviously not more than what you owe. It's strictly to cover that off. And they also have the Ontario Electricity Support Program where they kind of help make monthly payments. So if you are really tight and you need support and you are considered in the low income category, that is something to look into to give yourself some reprieve.
And again, you got to be proactive on that. You got to reach out, know what programs are available, and actually speak to people. I mean, in my experience, if you tell a creditor in advance that you've got an issue, it goes a lot better for you than if you let them take a payment and it bounces and now you're behind without them knowing. So,
right. And because it's not easy for people to call and say, I can't do this, right? There's a lot of emotions around that and feelings and stuff, and it's not always easy. We know that because we often have people tell us how difficult it is to start that call, how grateful they made the call, but how difficult it was to start. So, you know what, if you have a close friend or there's someone at your church, if you go to church, or the food bank or somewhere, if there's someone that you feel comfortable with and you talk to and they can advocate on your behalf and maybe do the talking for you after you give permission, that might be helpful for the people who don't want to make that call themselves, right? I think it's important to make the call and have that happen.
Yeah, if you've never made that call, it's kind of new. Well, someone helps you through it. Well, maybe the next time you'll be able to do it more on your own. So we were talking, I guess, specifically about your hydro bill, but I think those comments would apply to your gas bill, and I guess to a certain extent to your phone bill, your internet bill, your cable bill. I guess when you look at risk, well, if I don't pay my cable bill and they shut my cable off, well, I guess I don't have cable. I can't watch TV. Whereas if they shut my electricity off, I don't have electricity. That's a much more serious thing. So I think if I was getting into a cash flow problem, I'd be much more likely to be calling up the cable company and saying, look, just discontinue my service because I don't absolutely need it if cash is tight. Internet, well, maybe I do need that either for emergency purposes or I work from home or my kids need it for their homework or whatever. So in terms of risk, I guess, hydro, pretty high up on the list, gas, internet, but maybe, cable is lower on the list. So you want to evaluate each of those different things. Now, again, looking at my monthly expenses. So another expense that some people have is a car loan. So is a car loan in the same category as rent and mortgage in terms of deferrals, or do you have a different view of it?
No, car payments, you can also ask for a deferral. I mean, it does obviously depend on the company that you're with, but I hear oftentimes people saying, oh yeah, I deferred my car payment. So again, similar thing, you want to call them, talk to them, see how often you can defer and how much you can defer. I mean, again, if they're deferring it, they're putting it at the end, you are paying interest on it, so you are paying more. So you want to look at that and say, do I absolutely need that now? If yes, go ahead. Sometimes the smaller payments over a longer time work better, but you can, as I understand it, make a call and defer a car payment.
Now, in Ontario, and I believe pretty much every jurisdiction in North America, you are required to have car insurance. So, okay, what about deferring my car insurance payments? Any thoughts on that?
Well, that's definitely one of the high risk decisions to miss an insurance payment, because if you miss one, they can automatically cancel it. And then if they're reinstating it, your premiums could have immediately doubled. There were times during the pandemic where deferral payments were allowed, but in talking to some insurance companies now, that deferral is no longer available. It's only if they make a mistake. So when you're calling them, they're going to say, well, if you can't make the payments as they are, maybe we'll increase your deductible or lower your coverage so that you can have a lower monthly payment so that it's not a difficulty. But then that has levels of risk as well. Like if you need the insurance and you can't cover the deductible, then that's difficult, or you don't have enough coverage for what happened. You're also leaving yourself at risk. So I would say an insurance payment is something that you want to make sure you pay. The other thing you want to look at, if you have a car where you don't have a car payment, look at whether or not you really do need a car. Because sometimes, I know Ottawa Transit is crappy. Toronto Transit was much better when I lived there. I don't know now. I'm sure it's still pretty good, but you might want to look and say, do I actually really need a car? Because when I look at someone with a budget who has no car, they easily have an extra $800. Easy. With no car. So that's another thing that you want to consider. Do I really need this? Is this something that I can get rid of for now and get later if I absolutely need it?
Yeah, and that's, I don't want to be sexist here, but that's a difficult conversation to have with males, because males, see their self as being an extension of their car. But you're right. If you add up how much you pay for your car payment, your insurance, gas for the car, parking, whatever, and it can easily be one of your paychecks each month. Certainly if you get paid weekly, maybe even if you get paid bi-weekly. Now, if I work at a job that requires a car, or my job is way over there and there is no transit, okay, I guess you got a decision to make. But I have lots of clients who don't use their car to get to work. They use transit, but then they have their car on the weekend because that's when they do their shopping and they go visit their mother and whatever. Okay, would you be better off renting a car, or would you be better off, like me, driving a crappy car that I've had for 10 or 12 years and has no loan on it? And if so, then is it as important to have a low deductible for collision insurance, for example? If you have a loan against the car, then yes, you want to have full insurance, because if you're in an accident, you want something to pay off the loan. Whereas in my case, well, I guess if I'm in an accident, I guess I'm going to have to come up with the money to buy another used car. Perhaps I'm willing to take a bit more risk on that. A key point, I think, on insurance is that if your insurance gets canceled for non-payment, number one, you can't be driving the car legally. But number two, it's very difficult then to reestablish insurance because, well, you didn't pay last time. So obviously you're now going to a different insurance company and they're going to go, well, if you didn't pay before, your rates are going to be really, really high. So I think car insurance, I agree with you, that is a high risk endeavor. If you can't pay it, then you definitely want to be reaching out to the insurance company. Maybe it's a case of, okay, I'm going to have to park the car for a couple of months, take the insurance off until I've got the money to be able to drive it again. But you don't want to get it. You don't want it to lapse.
Minimum insurance, though. Sorry.
Well, yes, you're right. You still have to have fire insurance or whatever on it if it burns down in your parking garage. But you don't want it to lapse, and you absolutely don't want to be driving without insurance, because I believe in Ontario the fine is something like $6,000. So yeah, not paying your $200 insurance bill this month and then getting hit with a $6,000 fine is absolutely ridiculous. So
that survives if you're doing a restructuring.
Yes. A court fine does not go away in a bankruptcy or a consumer proposal. So it's a very serious thing. So, okay, that's kind of all of our living expenses, transportation, that kind of thing. What about debt? So I've got a credit card. I carry a balance on it. Now, obviously, with a credit card, there is a minimum payment I can make. And of course, we advocate paying your credit card balance in full every month. But if I can't, what's your advice? Should I at least pay the minimum payment? Well, yes, obviously, that's obviously advice. Of course you should. What if I can't even make the minimum payment? Then what do I do?
Well, if you can't pay your debts, then that is a good time to call a licensed insolvency trustee to kind of look at your situation, even if it is just to look at your budget and your options. Because, if you're missing a debt payment, that's not as significant as what we've shown about mortgage, rent, utilities, and stuff. So that's probably the first payment that gets missed. Sometimes, though, people don't like the stress of all the collection calls and the creditor calls, so they're actually skipping phone payments and utility payments to pay debt payments. But I would say if you're missing a debt payment and you can't make your minimums, then call a trustee.
Yeah, I would agree. When someone comes in to see you, and this has been my experience for the last, 35 years, because I started this before you were born, is very few people are behind on rent.
Right.
Very few people, if they actually do own a house, are behind on their mortgage payment. And okay, more people might be behind on a car payment, but that's also unlikely. And I think the reason is, well, my rent is every month. It comes out automatically. The landlord has post-dated checks. My mortgage, same thing. So it's not actually a payment I make. It's a payment they take. So I kind of never miss it. And I do conceptually realize that if I don't pay my rent, well, I guess I don't have a place to live. So that's usually the last payment people get behind on. But you're right. Something like a credit card payment, well, if I don't pay it this month, what's going to happen? It's not like they're going to evict me. It's a credit card payment. But if you can't even make the minimum payment on your credit card, and it's, okay, maybe my pay got screwed up at work and I'm getting a double pay 2 weeks from now and I can catch up, okay, then it's not so big a deal. But if you're at the point where you can't make the minimum payment, then I agree. At that point, it's like, well, there may not be any other choice other than to talk to a professional. And I'm going to turn this show into a commercial, though I guess that's exactly what it is. But that's when you got to be reaching out and saying, okay, I can't do it anymore. I don't want to get to the point where I can't pay my rent. So it's probably better to deal with things like credit cards, term loans, payday loans, all those kind of things, because that's where the interest gets crazy. And then you got serious problems. And so if I don't pay my credit card for long enough, what happens?
Well, they'll start collections. They'll send it to a collection agency. Then if it's still happening, they can take you to court and apply for a judgment and then ask for a garnishment or writ of execution on your home, a garnishment of your wages, bank account, or a writ on your home if you own one. So it doesn't go away if you ignore it, but I understand why sometimes we need to ignore it. But if all you can make is your minimum payments and you can never see yourself paying it down, then that is also a good time to call a trustee, right? Even if you're just making it by, how long do you want to just make it by for?
Yeah, and I understand if I file a consumer proposal, there's going to be a note on my credit report, and that's going to look bad. Yeah, but if you start missing payments, that's also on your credit report. And if your wages get garnished, that's also going to be pretty serious. So I think,
and the other part too is that even if you are making all of your minimum payments and you have a great credit score, who's going to give you credit again? Like you can have a great credit score and not be credit worthy, right? So then you're just kind of stuck in this limbo land until when? So credit scores are...
Yeah, you can have a great credit score because you're making all your payments, but you're robbing Peter to pay Paul, and you're taking a cash advance from this card to that card. So all my payments are up to date, but my debt level is continuing to increase, and eventually I'm going to have an issue.
Go ahead. One thing I just want to go back to with the budgets and stuff like that. If things are becoming tight, one other good way to deal with things is as you're buying food, making sure you don't get sucked into the sales that aren't sales. But buying extra dry goods, frozen goods, or canned goods, and kind of having a little bit of a stock up so that when you do have a hiccup, that you're like, no, wait a minute, we have enough food here to just live until my next pay. So I'm going to take my food budget from that pay and apply it towards the issue at hand. And that's what you can do if you're not able to have enough money to put aside for savings or pay your bills. You can kind of structure it that way to give yourself a reprieve.
Yeah. And again, what you're doing is being proactive there. Oh, I see spaghetti's on sale this week. Well, I'm going to buy a couple extra packages and put those away so that when cash is a bit tighter, I've got the extra. So the final payment we didn't talk about would be tax arrears. So I filed my taxes for 2020 and I owed money on CERB, or I filed for 2021 and I owed the CRB because I got CRB EI and I didn't pay full tax on it, or I had to cash in my RSP or whatever. So now I owe some taxes. The CRA is not phoning you every day to say you have to pay. But of course, if you don't pay, then eventually they come calling. So I assume that's another example of something that, well, yes, get on the phone with CRA, make a deal with them, send them $50 a month, whatever it is you can do. They're much less likely then to surprise you with a freezing of your bank account or a wage garnishment. Would you agree with that statement?
Yeah, I have found them to be more aggressive lately, for sure, where they'll just rent. I even had them where they had issued a requirement to pay after the person filed. I guess they hadn't updated their file, so we had to quickly issue the stay to say, whoa, you can't do that. So I have found them a bit more aggressive, and they don't like to take small payments. They want it paid in a year. Maybe two. So I do find CRA is not a creditor you want to get on the bad side of, because they can just, without court order, they can just step in and do whatever they want. Stop your bank account. They can issue the requirement to pay to your creditor. But it's also not recommended to avoid filing your taxes. Oh, I think I'm not going to file. No, you definitely want to file, because the consequences of not filing can be more significant, because they penalize you more, and it can be far more costly for a late filing than it is for interest on the amount owing. So you always want to make sure you're filing on time, and then calling them to set up whatever payment plan that's possible, or just send them money every single month. You can do that through a bank. But yeah, CRA is definitely someone that you want to make sure you're on side with.
Yeah, I totally agree. You got to get your taxes filed, because they're much more likely to be freezing your bank account if you owe them money and you haven't filed your taxes, so they don't even know how much you owe them. Whereas if
they'll arbitrarily assess you.
Yes, they will.
You make 3 times as much as what you actually do.
Right. So since you owe us $50,000, we're freezing your bank account. So it's much better to get your taxes filed, talk to them and say, look, I can't give you the full amount, but here's what I can give you. And if you're sending them something, then they are much less likely to be taking very aggressive action. So, okay, well, I think we've talked about a whole bunch of different kind of debts. That was pretty good. No notes. I think we did a fantastic job. So what is your ultimate summary of all this then? Take a look at the risk, pay what you can. Is that kind of what we're coming to here?
Absolutely. And you want to always look at whether this is a short-term problem or a long-term problem as well. Because short-term, you can make it through. It may not be pretty, but broke can be fixed. So in this moment, are you broke? Yep. How can I fix it? Short-term, move on, right? Sometimes a short-term part-time job, just to kind of get a little bit of extra cash flow, a reduction in expenses, as you said, for cable for a period of time. You can do it and get a plan. If it's more long-term, then certainly, if you see it as more of a long-term plan, or you've noticed that it's been a long-term thing for a while, call a professional and get some help as well.
I totally agree with that. So for anybody watching here, if you are in a position where, I just can't keep making these payments, go to hoys.com. You can click around. If you want to talk to Maureen, you can send her a message through there, or any one of our other professionals. What was that phrase you said? Broke can be fixed. I like that. I'd never heard that one before. That's good. So, and I agree with that, but you got to actually take some action and do it. So if your situation is temporary, then I agree. Get on the phone with your your landlord, your mortgage company, whatever. Hey, can I defer a payment? Can I double up next? Whatever, and work through it that way. If the debts are too big and you can't do that, well, then you got to deal with it. Reach out to a professional and deal with the problem that way. Excellent. Maureen, thanks very much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. That is our show for today. So if you're watching this on YouTube, you can click all the buttons, the likes, the subscribes, the notifications, whatever buttons you see, just push them. We release a new podcast every Saturday morning. Most of you are probably listening to the audio version of this. So again, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, whatever app you use, subscribe to Debt Free in 30. You will get the podcast every Saturday morning. So that is our show for today. Thanks for listening. I'm Doug Hoys. Until next week, that was Debt Free in 30.